Welcome to F Words for Female Founders, a podcast about the highs, the lows, and the what the Fs of building businesses in real time. I'm Michelle, alongside the wonderful Amy, Courtney, and Haley. We're the founders of 4 very different businesses at very different stages, and we met as founders in the summer 2025 Startmate cohort. We pretty much connected instantly as founders. Despite having very different backgrounds, we really shared this common thread and a commitment to kind of call it like it is. And we realized there's an opportunity to talk about the startup stories that most others leave out, the messy middle. Each week, we'll dive into a theme, swap stories, get real about the roller coaster of building something from the ground up. And we're going to share the stuff we're frothing, yes, I said that F word, on right now. Founder wins, stories that aren't hitting your usual feeds are all part of our podcast.
So we all know that fundraising is hard for everyone, for all founders, and even harder if you are a female founder, with only 1.8% of all capital going to female founders. That said, you've got 4 of us in the room who have obviously had a lot of investor conversations. Some of us have received funding before, and some of us are on that journey of raising capital today. But one thing that I thought might be useful to share is a few stories today on how to navigate that journey, or how we've found navigating that journey, because it's not always just about getting the money, it's also about the journey. And I think we've all probably no doubt got some interesting stories to tell. So I'll kick us off today by sharing one example or story that I experienced early on in my fundraising journey, which really helped me understand that, it's not just hard in terms of getting the meeting. It's not just hard in terms of getting the capital, being that being the end goal. It's also hard when you're in the room trying to understand the dynamic that's going on and what's happening there in that conversation. And I remember experiencing this early on when I was connected with an investor who seemed very interested in hearing more about what I was building at Slice, trying to basically reduce barriers to home ownership and support brokers and lawyers in delivering those services. So very interested in the space, but as the conversation got going, I realized that it wasn't necessarily a fit with this person, this investor's fund. So the conversation wasn't actually one that was framed clearly as an investment conversation. And as time went on, I actually started to kind of lose track of where the conversation was going, and trying to understand and make sense of what this person's intent was rather difficult. Anyway, long story short, I end up partway through that conversation with him, and he starts to ask what I'm interested in doing in the future and whether or not I would be looking for a role. So this person that came in on an investment basis was basically trying to turn it into an employer-employee conversation and look at how I could join his startup and his company, as opposed to investing in my company. Now, obviously, if I wanted to apply for a job, I would have applied for a job. I would have said that I was open to looking at opportunities, but this person came in the back door of investment and then was actively looking at how I could support them with their mission and their company, which was very unusual and just one example of many when it comes to actually, really understanding what that person's intent is. And I think that happens for all, but in particular for women. As we got through that conversation, I was happy to kind of build rapport and continue that conversation to some degree. But he later said, and I quote, "I've got funding and you don't." So that's where that conversation landed. And probably implicit in that conversation was I might struggle to get funding as a female.
Well, it sounds like you just didn't take rejection very well.
Maybe didn't, and
like
they
you
never
said
do.
no, I'll quite back at you. I've got funding and you don't.
They never do. They never do. Brutal though, hey, because obviously, like it's almost like I'm aware of the problem and salt in the wound.
Well, and now gonna use this to their advantage. I mean, what a way to take something toxic and now make it radioactive and use that pain point against you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, it's like they knew that that was gonna be a challenge, and so they tried to use that as a tool, in that conversation. But there's many other stories like this. This was just one that obviously did leave me with a "what the fuck?"
Mm,
Because I did go in there on the basis, they'd actually approached me to have that conversation. So generally, I would suggest doing more research around who that investor is, what their mandate is. But you're also open in those early stages to have those conversations.
yeah,
So
100%.
generally, I would also suggest that you don't try and tell someone they don't have funding and you do.
Mm,
Um, but I think this is just a really good moment to reflect on and think, well, actually, so many people do go into these conversations and not fully realize that the intent of the other party might not be
mm,
to actually invest at all. So
mhm.
it really is about doing proper prospecting, understanding whether they're likely to invest and not diving into your IP beforehand, if so.
Yeah.
Um, because the other conversation I know we've had with, I don't know if we've all been on the receiving end of this conversation, but a few of us in the room here will know one woman who was also invited by an investor to a hotel room. And after asking, actually, are you actively investing at the moment?
Mm,
He later ghosted her. So clearly that conversation didn't have the right intent either. Have
mm.
you guys had kind of conversations where you haven't felt that their intent has been transparent, or, that they were meaningful?
Mm.
Yeah, maybe they were time wasters.
It's
Yeah.
interesting because I think I'm so early on in this process that I treat every conversation almost like a dating game. Like I know that it may not be the best fit, but you're just not sure, and you don't want to close that door without first understanding who they are and what they kind of are expecting. I mean, what I've noticed is some investors like you to be upfront from the get go. I am taking this call on the basis that I'm going to ask you for money. Whereas some of them like to get to know you first. And so it's a really hard game, like in your story, Amy, until you got that job offer, it could have very well been in that I'm just going to get to know this person, maybe not now, but maybe down the line. So
And it
it's
was,
so hard to filter them out.
I was taking it down
Mm.
that, like, I was trying to navigate the conversation and
Mm,
understand where we were going because I felt the uncertainty in the way that the conversation was framed. Which
mm,
a positive takeaway from that is if you are going for funding, I think it's really important that you set up the conversation and frame the conversation, sort of echoing what you're saying, Haley, but around, hey, we're actively raising, this is what we're going for. I can take you through the pitch and then we can dive in deeper. Like, I
mm,
think it's the same with sales calls actually, but if the investor isn't giving a clear framework,
mm,
then take charge and actually frame that conversation yourself. Because in the end, I just sat there kind of trying to weave through what this guy was talking about and understand what his intent was. And it
mm,
was early stage, Haley, as well. So
mm,
that's probably part of it. But I do think you can waste a lot of time having conversations with people who, you know, it's okay to be open, but it's also good to have your eyes wide open as well.
mhm.
I
100%.
would say
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a big issue with the whole comparison that our industry loves to have with fundraising and dating. And, when you talk about fundraising strategies, a lot of people who have gone through this will kind of describe it as you've got to go be the hot girl at the bar, be this like FOMO everyone wants, and they're chasing. And this dating culture inside of fundraising, I think, is really dangerous because it does. I've fundraised for a couple of businesses, mostly in the US, and there have been VCs that I have from the outside looking in, massive respect for. And then when I've met with them, it's become pretty clear early on in the discussions. This was during COVID, where the Zoom call would be pushed into, well, gosh, Michelle, this would be far easier if we could just meet in New York next week. Why don't we come meet here at 6 p.m.? I'm like, how about we don't do that? Because I know exactly what you're inferring when the location that you're texting me is a bar. So I feel like there is this really thick gray space where they like to kind of joke in this dating scenario, but it can, I think, lead to some really dangerous situations for women, particularly for young founders who are green in this space. And I think having had those experiences, it's definitely sharpened my sword to kind of figure out, what those intentions are on earlier as we get into fundraising. But even to the point now where I had some VCs that had put some time on my calendar last week, and I thought, you know what? I actually don't know that we're a good fit. I need you to prove that you're actually worth my time now. And so I just sent a really respectful email based on everything that I had understood their fund was doing and their mandates for certain stages of pre-seed through Series A. My understanding is you look for A, B, and C in terms of traction. Is this true? And if so, out of respect for protecting your time and mine, I think we should cancel this meeting. And it was great because it just set the expectation right up front. There was clarity right up front. And now everyone knows that we're here to do business or not.
Yeah, and I think that is it. Like, and it's normal when you're early stage to not know what conversations you should be taking and to feel nervous about saying no, but actually the saying no is your most powerful kind of outcome response because we are so short on time. So any conversation you're having that isn't actually, and it's sorry to be like this is a little transactional in saying this, but that doesn't have a clear outcome or clear framework, or you're not aware that yes, you're just going in to build the connection at least. Like you want to know what you're spending your time on and have the opportunity to make a decision on whether or not that's a valuable use of your time. And we don't have enough of it. It's the main finite resource that we have. So actually, perhaps you shouldn't be, perhaps as women, we shouldn't be so open to just having lots of conversations unless we know,
The intent.
what the intent and what that means for, from a business outcome.
I think reminding ourselves too that not all dollars are equal. Like who writes the check is just as important as how much is written on the check.
I just think like this is so interesting because when I was first starting in these conversations with investors, it would often be framed as a chat. And I had no idea that they were actually taking it as a pitch. And now I know that every conversation is a pitch and that you have to present yourself this way and be very aware that everything you say is being recorded essentially and being used to make a decision about you. And I think early on, a lot of investors say, look, we like to talk to founders for, up to a couple of years before we make an investment. And, I think like those are not very helpful things to say when you're looking for investment right now, especially if it's an early stage investment. So I think it's been really interesting having now gone through StartMate and having so much advice and then talking to you guys as well and having, all of the different experiences come through to feel like, oh, okay, I'm gonna own the conversation. I'm gonna have a script when I go into this conversation, and whether it's a chat, whether it's a meet and greet, I'm treating it like a pitch. And like you said, Amy, taking control of that narrative because I think the power dynamic is very real, and that's something that I'm trying to get better. Michelle, you're so good at this. Is actually knowing your own power and knowing what you're bringing to this conversation, which is an amazing opportunity. And I think that that's something that has kind of evolved in me over the last couple of months.
That's awesome. It's so good to hear that progression. As time's gone on, I had more of those kind of informal conversations, but now I would just say I'm either fundraising or I'm not. And I don't talk to investors when I'm not raising. So that's sort of where I sit with it. But it is because of that time being finite. I think if I had heaps of time, then sure, I'd be open to more of those conversations. But realistically, you need to be using those conversations are better with customers. That time is better spent with customers.
Yeah, totally.
I think too, what we're seeing is a shift in just the industry because, let's say 3 years ago, you could really still sell early stage VCs, angels, investors on the big vision. And now with AI, it's just so easy to build a company. So you can have the world's greatest big vision, But it really is going to come down to execution. Like that's always been the case, but now more than ever. And so I think with the early stage rounds, accelerators are fantastic. Startmate, Techstars, whatever it is, whatever region of the world you're in, there are plenty of really reputable accelerators to give you that early stage fuel to get you to the MVP, to get you from 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 for your first customers. And I think that there's value in the leadership mindset that they give, they train you on. There's value in some fundraising strategies. And there's value in the early stage connections that they'll share for VCs. But I think the number one value, and we're living proof of it right now, is your founder network, your peer-to-peer network, because that's actually what's going to get you through the long game of this. Accelerators help you for 12 weeks. And in week 13, you've got to figure out what your next version of growth is going to look like on your own. And if you've been able to form these strong alliances and partnerships with your fellow founders, you're now part of an accelerator for the life of your business, which is amazing. And so I think that I would encourage anyone who's in that early stage, look for the right accelerator. If you've got traction and you're getting the numbers, then it's exactly as you were just saying, Amy. It is chase those customers, chase those numbers so that you can be undeniable. And that's what's going to give you the confidence to be what I call, you have to be delulu when you're talking to investors. You have to be so consumed and delusional about the business you're growing that it is almost a foregone conclusion that if your business is that you're making cars out of bubble gum, it is like a foregone conclusion that everyone in the world right now needs to chew as much bubble gum as possible so that we have a production line ready to go. Like, you have got to speak to it with such authority and conviction that there is no alternate reality except for cars made of bubble gum. and then you get funded.
It's really hard to do that without having the evidence to back that up. And I think as a female, it's hard to do that without having that evidence as well, because we don't tend to make as many large unsolicited claims. I don't know.
Yes,
we need those
baseless claims is almost what I was going to say, but we are quite often, I think, a bit more realistic, and that goes against women when they are raising. And I think that's something to be aware of.
I have a question for you guys, actually. Do you think, as a general rule, that's because women like to under-promise, over-deliver? Is that like a gender, cultural, societal thing that maybe we are just more tuned to do?
They've done studies, not on, I don't know of a study in the VC investment space, but they have done it on job applications where basically men will apply for jobs where they have 20% of what's in the job description, and women won't apply if they've only got 80%. So based on that study, that sort of suggests that actually, women just tend to ground themselves a little bit more in realism and what's happening today. So one of the big things that is important, I think, for females going for funding is to talk about that big vision, and then lean on your strengths and show them what is working today, because I know a lot of men in the space that will be more focused on the vision and can't back it up in the same way that women can. So that's our opportunity to kind of leverage the realism that we have, but we need to be really careful about underselling, I would say.
Yeah. Agree.
On that, I think there's probably quite a few other tips we have in the fundraising space, but I'm keen to dive back into another story, and it sort of brings me back when you were discussing, Michelle, the hotel invitation or the bar invitation that you received, and another founder we know had a hotel invitation. I am going to spin a positive on that because I had a breakfast invitation this week. And I actually spoke to my partner about this after, because I was like, do you think that was quite intentional? I wonder if they think about that and they think a breakfast is not a nice kind of informal setting because we're progressing in conversations, but it's still very safe. And I think there is a responsibility on the investors to be thinking, like a bit about that, but also there is an opportunity for us as women to say, I feel better about a breakfast. Equally, if you feel comfortable with a drink, feel comfortable with a drink, but make sure that as we were saying, Courtney, it's not a chat, it's still a pitch, and you still need to take control of the format of that conversation. Which most times won't lend itself to a drink, I think, at the end of the day. But pivoting into a story on that basis of whether it's breakfast, whether it's dinner, whether it's a drink, whatever it is, I did also do. I also know a founder who went for a lunch, and this founder was sitting at a little bit of light relief, but was sitting there with the investor, and they the founder wasn't all that hungry, but the investor decided, they'll order lunch, so that's fine. They're up for lunch. The investor proceeds to order 4 eggs and chop up said eggs and slurp them from the plate, like literally face to plate, slurping the eggs up one by one. And the founder is like standing there, like just trying not to react at all. But it's like, what the if is going on here? So we're moving out of like inappropriate in a different way to weird inappropriate. Maybe it's fine, but it's weird. And then
that speaks to a power imbalance though, right? If you're confident enough to just slurp up some eggs and not give a shit.
I think it's the way they were eaten is what's so weird. And then this investor goes, "Oh, are you sure you don't want anything to eat?" Continues to order a second meal and another like 2-3 eggs, again slurping them straight from the plate. I think you could think that's a power dynamic thing, Hayley, but I reckon that's weird and wonderful. But it just goes to show like the different conversations you can be having with these investors and the different frameworks, formats, what lunch looks like, what breakfast looks like.
Yeah.
Did they invest in the end? That's the question.
They were close to investing, and then they didn't invest in this company. But honestly, I'm not sure if you want Eggman on your cat table.
That is akin to not an investor conversation, but in my young corporate days, and I was maybe just my early 20s, and I went to a job interview, and it was over breakfast. And we sat down, and clearly, I was very nervous, and this guy was so, so comfortable, and we were just having a chat. And then there was this fly that just kept buzzing around. It was like, meow, meow, meow. About 5 minutes into the conversation, he just raises his hand, grabs this fly, like catches it midair, squeezes it, and throws it on the ground. And I was just like,
scary.
And he's like, and that's what it's like to work for me.
I was just like, me, dressed with a blazer, being all professional, sweating a little bit, and he's just like, I don't give. 2 flags.
I thought you were going to say, and he ate it or something.
No, but it was just that whole, like, you know what I mean? That level of comfort, and that's kind of what I mean about the power imbalance. Like, if you're a little bit nervous and you feel like you're on the back foot, you're on your best behavior versus like, someone just coming into a conversation where you kind of just don't really care because you've done this a million times over. You know your worth, you know what you're looking for. And I think that's the attitude that we probably need to have, right, when we come into these things.
And I think
I've never forgotten the fly story, and it's been over 15 years.
Yeah, I just think those little moments stick in your mind, right? But I think we've nailed it there. That it's actually, how can you create some control or sense of control of that environment so that you can show up in the best way possible? Like, how can you set yourself up for success? And I think early on, if you're pitching, I'm not so sure how useful like a breakfast or a dinner or anything. Like, I actually think a meeting room environment is the right environment. It gives you that opportunity to make your pitch and treat it like that formal occasion which you want it to be. I think the breakfast that I went on is like partway, it's a while down the track. So I think it makes sense to have more of those social engagements later. But when you're having that first conversation, there is a bit of nerves. Like, I don't think it's a bad thing to suggest and say, do you know what, I'd prefer to jump in a room so I can pull up my deck or whatever it is that, you need to use to reframe. But I think you're going to struggle to get your pitch out when you've got scrambled eggs and chutney dropping down your sweater anyway.
I think what we have to do is reframe how we empower early stage founders to put some guardrails on their own time and their story. And I was just talking to somebody from our cohort. I won't mention who because I'm not sure if they're sharing it widely, but they have a 10,000 word thesis that they are sending to any investor who's interested to raise with them, that they have to read and agree to the thesis first because they're sick of having their time wasted, essentially. And I think there's something to that, whether it's your own, written thesis, or if you decide you're going to only commit X number of days a week or hours in a month to do this, or that you're looking for a certain criteria that an investor or an angel has to meet. I think by articulating that to yourself first is really important because it will give you a sense of theoretical ownership and control in this process, because so much of it feels out of your control that you can very quickly, very easily feel like you are flying in the wind to everyone's whim and making zero progress. You have to put a few stakes in the ground and decide that I am sticking to these so that you've got some sense of control. And I think what happens is subconsciously, people can read that in you. And that kind of confidence is actually what they're looking for. When investors say they're investing in the founder, what they're saying is if they're investing in somebody who is so ready to be courageous enough that they only believe in what they're saying and doing, they're looking for those micro expressions and moments that really iterate that again and again and again. So if you can create that for yourself, I think that's kind of strategy number one. And I do think we need to spend more time as early stage founders helping others get that strategy in place. And the reason for that is you want to have the right investors early, because then when you go to market, you've got customers, you've got traction, you're doing well, and you're getting ready for Series A, those first stage founders will actually dictate the flow of your next wave of investors. And you don't like attracts like. If you have below average investors who are slurping eggs, dirty, messy, horrible, whatever, think about the company. No, but think about the company they keep, because that's who they can bring to the table. You need first-class investors to bring other first-class investors so that your network gets wider and elevates higher. So really think about the cap table as well.
Yeah, that's totally true. I think to your point around theoretical control, I think there is real control to be had though. And it is just in running a process and going, this is my process, this is the way in which I provide information. I don't provide any information, too much information too soon. Like the thesis thing with that 10,000 words, what I find really interesting, and I think this is, you better hope that every word in that 10,000 words is good and like that the data is accurate, because if there's something wrong there or if there's too much information and it says the wrong thing, you can turn the investor off. So I think whilst that's a bold move, like you also want to manage how much information you share, whom you share that information with, and at what stage in your conversation with them do you provide that information. That's what I've realized in particular going through my most recent conversations is actually, quite a short deck at first to get the meeting. You just want to like wet the whistle, but you don't want to give them too much information because you might say the wrong thing and then they might go no because of this. So you want to give them less so that they have less to say no about. And then you go, okay, longer deck and maybe thesis. And then from there, you're, maybe there's an extra document or a product demo or a customer testimonial. And then only from there, like, do you start to let them into the data room? Yeah. So I think there's also a danger in the way in which you're managing your materials and the information that you're providing. If you give too much too soon, you can totally scare someone away. If you're not giving enough, they might think there's not enough there. So there's a real balance there, but it's all about kind of working out what your process is, working out the prospects, the types of investors that you need to be talking about. Like it really needs to be run like a sales funnel is what I'm saying essentially. And early stage, that might just look like to your point, I think accelerators are the best place to start, Michelle, but it could also be angels that are giving a small amount to get you moving. And then when you move into kind of those bigger investor conversations, like for check sizes, 500, K and above, I think you need to have a much more kind of stringent process and know exactly. You have to have a lead of prospects who you're reaching out to. You have to have a series of documents, and you have to know when you're going to provide different pieces of information, which you learn as you go. But that's one thing I've learned, because I think you can provide too much information too soon, and that can be to your detriment.
Yeah.
I gotta say, there's a lot of pitfalls, there's a lot of stress and exhaustion that goes into fundraising. But as a reminder to everyone, including ourselves on the call, that when it goes right, it goes right. Just like any human interaction, investors are still people, I promise. And if I think about, all the money we've raised in various companies, the first interaction was positive, followed by the second and the third and the fourth until close. So, it should be a journey with those investors that actually does feel good from start to finish when you're taking their money. If at some point during that it's not feeling good, that's when you should be asking yourself why. What is this toxic, vibe coming in, and where is it coming from? But at the end of the day, if you look back at the journey, you can really see what the common thread was. And that was, from the very first meeting, this person or this fund were genuinely interested in the product you were building. They were genuinely interested to understand your growth strategy. They genuinely had respect for you as a founder and the decisions you had made. And they genuinely want to be on this journey with you. And those are the boxes that you should be looking to check. And I think sometimes if you focus on the boxes you need checked and ignore the ones that you don't, it'll help you to subconsciously not waste time, because you don't want to you don't need to try to convert someone who isn't interested from the first call. Move on.
Yeah.
Get that first things first.
I think that's such good advice, Michelle. And I think that it's actually really hard when you're doing this for the first time, if you haven't gone through an accelerator or you haven't had that experience before, to know, like, you think every opportunity that comes your way is a potential to result in you getting funded, which means your business survives and goes forward and can grow and do all the amazing things you want to do. And I think it gets easier to discern when you see a red flag or an orange flag where, you, as you say, like, it doesn't feel good. Something is wrong. Like, I can share an example of a pitch I did last year where, from the very beginning, under the guise of mentoring me, they were asking me to change my pitch and to frame it differently. And I just ignored that little gut feeling that was like, that's not right, that's wrong. And I thought, you know what, it's fine. I just need to get through to the next round, and we'll go from there. And it ended up being a horrific experience where they really, really made me feel bad, because they managed to somehow get the one thing that I am most vulnerable to, which is a fear that I'm not smart enough to do this, that I won't be able to take on this huge problem. And I look back on it now as such a valuable experience to go through. It was really painful at the time, but I look back on it now and I'm like, oh my God, if I just listened to that little voice and trusted myself at the beginning when they were making these original edits to the pitch, I feel like it would just have been such a different story. But I don't regret anything. I'm glad I went through it, because I won't ever let that happen to me again.
Yeah.
But
you
it's just
have to go through it to learn it.
You kind of do, don't you?
In hindsight,
well, I do.
It's and even listening to it, it's that really great advice. And I think somewhere down the line, we could all fall victim to something, that we just ignore the red flags and that gut feeling, because it just feels like maybe there's that imposter syndrome popping up again. I think we spoke about that on the last one, but we're hard on ourselves. And so we do sometimes resort to, oh, this person must know better.
And that thought that it's so hard to raise money, that kind of voice comes back and is like, well, it's so hard. I have this opportunity. Shouldn't I try to go for it?
Yeah.
Thanks for joining our community. You can follow us on Instagram at FWordsPodcast and subscribe wherever you listen. Share this episode with a fellow founder or someone thinking about becoming one.